There you go. Okay, so um, okay, so you can see my screen. Is that a yes?
Yeah,
okay, I got a few thumbs up. Thanks. Okay, so by the way, this is our Discord channel, so this is how we communicate. And we're gonna go into the links here and see the presentation from LA. Let me know if the audio, is the audio on? Okay. Sorry about that glitch. There's a way to say share screen, share sound. Okay. Okay. So, okay, let me know if the sound is not on. Thanks.
We will begin by taking you on a visual journey through Los Angeles. It's 2021. You are driving through LA neighborhoods. Pastel-colored boxes advertising strange yet familiar atomic age doodads appear everywhere. The relic of a bygone era radiates from their ornamental glamour. These buildings are weird. Cars on display in overhanging parking reflect the car-centric society. Gilded signs and decorative tile suggesting a glamour just beyond reach poke at a classic advertising culture. The thing about these dingbats is the turbulent history behind their image. What was cheaply built in the 1950s only to last 30 years is now historically preserved to represent a former billboard culture. The dingbat came into existence in post-war LA during a booming consumer economy where many Angelenos found themselves moving upwards socially. The dingbat served as a transitory materialist figure, allowing families and singles to move into the city for a cheap price. The dingbat's reputation suffered between the 1970s and 2000s. A new zoning ordinance that outlawed dingbats, along with the recognition of their structural vulnerability, established a negative sentiment that rudely set the decline of the dingbat image. However, through officialization of its historic status and re-representation by artists in the 2000s, a new fascination in its image and typology rose. The re-enchantment of the dingbat reached a broad audience, including historians, architects, residents, and the mass public. Many consider this odd, sometimes ugly, building an important contribution to Los Angeles and contemporary life in the metropolis. We will explore the dingbat's representation through three distinct timelines: economic, sentiment, and media. First, let's understand what a dingbat means formally.
The Dingbat, a two-story wood-framed apartment building constructed between the 1950s and 70s, built to the maximum area of the single-family lot with tucked-under parking, 5 to 12 units, and approximately 7,500 square feet. They were cheaply and efficiently constructed for-profit development and fulfilled a need for medium-density housing, bringing many people to the city. The dingbat can be thought of as an exterior billboard facade facing the city with cheap housing hidden behind. Diving into the three timelines that unravel the mystery of the dingbat. The prehistory of the dingbat is tied inextricably to the history of the growth of LA. Western expansion across the country and dreams of sunny weather and single-family home ownership caused the city of Los Angeles to grow from a minor city of 100,000 people in 1900 to more than 1.5 million in 1940. As the city rapidly expanded, it was racially redlined in order to demarcate areas of security and desirability. With growth, new ways of housing the masses were needed, which resulted in California birth typologies such as the bungalow home and the tightly clumped bungalow court. The single-family home was the living style of choice. Modernist architecture styles from Europe that symbolized ease of construction and new ways of inhabiting the world began to seep into the built vernacular of Los Angeles. These changes brought with it car-centric design and the rapid materialist consumer.
Following World War II, the population increased by over 1 million in 15 years, prompting a boom in building and fresh ideas of how a city should be inhabited. Temporary military housing like Roger Young Village was removed, and newly built freeways displaced Black, Brown, and other communities. An urgent need for the replacement of the housing stock was materializing. With most land in Los Angeles taken up by single-family, many radical ways of building were introduced. The dingbat was a 7 to 10 multi-story dwelling that was 2 to 3 stories and occupied a single-family lot. This cheap but efficient mode of construction enabled housing relief, whereas the outer corners of the city experienced development on the large swaths of land. The dingbat allowed for living in the midst of the city near freeways and with quick access to places of work and fun. The popular atomic age ornamental doodads known as dingbats, which gave the type its name, allowed each residence to project itself as an existing billboard, papering over the repetitive generic design of units within. During the 1970s and 80s, just as the dingbat became part of the cultural imagination, improvements to zoning requirements led to its decline. The new parking regulations passed in 1964 required 1.5 parking spaces for a 2-bedroom apartment. This made the dingbat apartment not as appealing to developers and essentially halted the building of the typology. At this point, Rainer Benham has already brought the dingbat to popular cultural and made its image iconic. The work of artists Ed Ruscha, Leslie M. Siegel, and Judy Fiskin, among others, feature the dingbat apartment prominently, as it can be seen from the street in the drive-by. These critical works of deadpan photography brought even more discourse about the self-advertising apartment in Los Angeles and the West Coast. The artists used mostly black and white photography. This medium sanitized the happy pastel colors and made the images archival and matter of fact. That chronicled the dingbat as a phenomenon and embedded it in the architectural and art discourse. Thus, the Victorian Scott Brown's decorated shed has become a duck.
In the 1990s and 2000s, LA demographics solidifies its status as a cultural melting pot. Middle-class families gain economic power. Mid-century buildings start to show their age. Demand for efficient densification threatens old-time relics like the dingbat into obsolescence. Responding to its quick physical degradation, but a small growing fan base, the LA Conservancy drafted a preservation plan for the dingbat in 2003. The 1994 Northridge earthquake rumbled over 200 soft-story dingbats to collapse. Not too long after, in 1998, the slums of Beverly Hills film underscores the economic divide in LA using the dingbat as its backdrop. The dingbat's reputation starts to decline. In media, however, professional photographers start to capture the whimsicality of mid-century Googie architecture. Clive Piercy embraced the crappiness of it and spread his infatuation for dingbats in a 448-page photo series. His work responds to Judy Fiskin's deadpan technique using black and white photography. Some photos are in motion, while others are angled. This careless but honest representation addresses the typology through an outsider's perspective, which is increasingly less subjective. Amateur photographers continue this documentation on digital platforms like Flickr. With historic preservationists on its side, the dingbat returns to the public reception with positive regard. New developments start to resemble its typology. Artists, residents, and Angelenos independently herald the dingbat as a historic icon. Demographics shift nearly to 80% mixed race population in the white-collar and middle-class level. The LA Conservancy officially declared the dingbat typology a historic building in 2012. They followed up with a requirement to retrofit all soft-story buildings as a part of its preservation. Today, 119 dingbats are undergoing soft-story preservation. The 2021 low-rise competition responds to the need for fully utilized single-family plots. Approved ADU plans adopt iconic LA styles, including the dingbat. Angelenos take to online forums to discuss the dingbat's history and its weirdness and share opinions from distaste to adoration. Many users, like the residents, are starting to recognize this typology as the dingbat. In media, this is the era of nostalgia and imitation. The dingbat populates Instagrams, Flickr albums, and art forums. Its typology even appears on commercial business buildings. Our walkthrough of LA reflects the on-the-go style from Clive Piercy to Judy Fiskin. Carcentricity, both in its exhibition of cars and in the roll-by photographic method, is still strongly present.
In summary, economically, the dingbat began as a means to an end, and today, after a brief period of setbacks, remains a popular, affordable option for low-income Angelenos. Sentimentally, the dingbat has reflected the superficial glamour of a star-studded city with a rising tide of mass media representation. And in media and representation, the dingbat was a cultural pariah of the 1970s. Curiosity in its multitudinous facade of personalities dominating digital forms of representation, currently revealing the cultural imaginary of Los Angeles. Today, the prevailing image has returned to its origin, hoping for a new future with an attractive front, cheap living, and mostly positive public representation.
Our dingbat is called the Hauser. So this is our selected precedent case study. It's completed in 1955 with 7 units, 5 one-bedroom and 2 two-bedroom units at 5,900 square feet. It's located in the Wilshire district of central LA. And we got the opportunity to interview one of the residents there, Charlie Phillips. When he first moved in 22 years ago, he just said, I just needed a place to live. 22 years later, he knows all the residents by name, and he feels the sense of camaraderie and community. And he now says, I enjoy where I live because everything is accessible by car and because he has the sense of community in this Hauser dingbat. This dingbat, from a collection of historical documents that we found on it, used to be single-family plot, and now it's a multifamily property. The explosion of the dingbat was built on the single-family lot back in the 1950s and became more and more available, taking advantage, maximizing the plot, and using the tuck-under parking to accommodate for the vehicles. It follows a typical dingbat floor plan, and it is currently listed as a historic site and is undergoing soft story construction.
During our visit, we took copious photos to create a photogrammetry model, and this is more of a close-up of Charlie's apartment, mainly kitchen and a living room. Here are our results. This is a turntable of the model that we made, showing the interior juxtaposed with the exterior of the Hauser apartment building. And this is just a fun little piece that we made where you can move around and essentially create a dingbat as any contractor would at the time. A simple stucco box with some decorations.
So finally, the dingbat has represented an affordable housing type that is not only affordable, but also an attractive figure of what could be affordable. Questions of its sustainability still remain. How does this building give residents dignity? Does it even matter? Owners will pay around $300,000 in the next few years to retrofit up to code. That may be an uptick of up to $38 per month in rent for the next 2 to 5 years. With an increasing need for densifying metropolitan Los Angeles with affordable options, the dingbat may see more challenges functionally and financially down the road. At the same time, a rising tide of artists, historians, residents, and fans altogether may be its salvation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing, thanks. Fantastic. So, wow. Well, normally it's like we sit around for a bit and like think about what we want to say, and as we don't really have time for that. So this is kind of like it has to be more like a rapid fire of inquiry. So I of course have a few questions lined up, but I would really want to open up right away. If someone has they want to ask about a comment, I invite that.
I'm just very interested in the interior, the relationship between the interior and exterior. Could we see that image again?
Yeah, guys, it's something you can do, or do I need to do that? How do Tim, is that something you can do, or is it easier that I do it?
I think if you have the Miro board open, you could probably just take us there.
Yeah, but it's so slow on my computer, actually, it rarely loads. So if you have it open, or one of you guys have it open, that's better.
Here we go, I got it.
Thanks.
So let's see here. This would be the interior. So it's made up about probably like 400 to 500 photos, and the AI kind of stitches it together and gives us a 3D model. And this is it actually in Exxon.
It's interesting also. It's interesting for several reasons. It's interesting because here you give us some information that's beyond how the exterior plays into popular culture and the imagination, and also because this interior image becomes a statement on artwork in itself, where you add something to the representation of the dingbat, because this is not, as far as I saw the presentation, this is not something that has been the focus of the many artists that have documented the dingbats. They have sort of stayed on the street. Could you share a few thoughts on what this adds to the representation of the dingbat?
Well, interesting you say that. We actually found that there's not a lot of kind of photographs of the interior, and we had the tremendous pleasure of actually and honored to be allowed in just as things were opening up after COVID. And this gentleman let us in, and yeah, it was really cool to get to walk in. And he's been there for 20 years. And seems like a lot of the furniture and you know, the bathroom wasn't changed. It was like as if time was standing still from the 70s. And so yeah, it was really interesting to actually juxtapose his bedroom with his permission, or kitchen, I'm sorry, with the exterior, because it's as if we get to kind of look behind the curtain, behind the advertisement.
Yeah. And we also, I guess, noticed, as you did, that there isn't a ton of information about these interiors. They're kind of the hidden or the introverted part of the building, whereas the billboard or the facade has been well represented. And so we found it quite interesting that just in the last couple of years, with like Zillow and other apartment rental platforms, that suddenly you're seeing these interiors photographed maybe more in a commercial sense. And so with the chunk, the collapsing of the two into one space, we thought was the most interesting or relevant for, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a great question. Yeah, I mean, I can't help myself to jump in, but I think that is so spot on, and because it, as Natalia is saying, it's producing a new form of representation, right? That's seeing a new relationship between the iconic exterior and then what are sort of the imprints, the remnants of a lived life of Charlie, as I understand his name is, who lived there for like 20 years. And so in your own words, in Nick's words, this idea of looking behind the curtain is very interesting, because it's, in a one way, it's a revealing of the inside, but of course it's also kind of like a veiling, if a veil is something you can so you can mask, because it is of course a new representation that is yet, and I think Nick as well early in his presentation talks about what he calls rebuilding this kind of digital image of it. So we're relaunching it in some way. I think that discussion is very interesting.
If I can just quickly jump in as well, I think something that you mentioned with regards to Clive Piercy and this kind of artworks, that I think what you call it, the archival quality of something, that you can actually create content that makes things archival in a sense. It's a really interesting idea that we can keep producing things that actually offer some perspective into something historical that can be kind of used in the future and offers this new perspective. So I think this idea of making our own content to create discussions are really important. Yeah, I think, I mean, overall, I think it was a really, really thorough presentation, and I just want to congratulate you on that.
A really interesting moment that I want to kind of maybe return to briefly is the moment that you identify that the LA Conservancy landmarks this building type. So rather than, if I'm understanding correctly, individual instantiations of this building type, we have the preservation of the type as such, perhaps or purportedly unhinged from the specific author, the designer, and or the developer. And as well, I mean, there is a geographic specificity in that these are all in the LA region, as I understand, but we're not talking about one kind of historically preserved neighborhood, that this is diffuse across a slightly larger geography. And I wonder, rather than maybe reproducing that, those presuppositions, the kind of erasure of the architect, the erasure of the developer, I wonder more specifically if we focus on the kind of financial structures behind these projects and this kind of broad-based development as you've identified, what that might begin to reveal. I think this is just to suggest kind of an added layer of analysis might ask, and I think you're pointing me to some of this very material, which maybe you didn't have a moment to describe in the presentation, but what is it that makes these profitable in this particular moment? And why does that profit motive perhaps begin to erode at a certain point? I think as we're seeing in Los Angeles, there's a kind of strong backlash of sorts against multifamily housing. And I wonder where that kind of motivation enters the historical record and when. And I think by locating the developers and the architects perhaps behind many of these buildings, that might begin to tell that that aspect of the history, which is to say, if we're charting the rise of these and their kind of conversion into objects of nostalgia, I think the other aspect to that kind of denouement of the narrative would have to look to kind of motivations against multifamily housing in Los Angeles as they've increasingly taken hold.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and building to also perhaps Christopher's point about the archival quality to the project. I can't help but consider that in light of so it's how a building's ability to become preservable, because the sort of timelessness that architecture has sometimes been imbued with is not here. It's obviously a completely different discussion about its image quality that remains, that sort of continuously makes it relevant in a LA context, to the point that now it's a preservable kind of building. So I think it both kind of points to the like. And then maybe a question for the cluster is that you, through your research, have you come across forms of a strategy that the Dingbat is applying? Like, is it relevant today as Gary was saying, this anti-sentiment for or this moving away from multifamily housing? And here's an example of an affordable and attractive, in some ways odd way, but attractive affordable housing typology. Do you see any strategies in this typology that has somehow relevance today? or I can ask, like, throughout your research, in what way do you think that what can the dingbat teach us today about new housing forms, for example, or affordable housing forms?
I think maybe what I found most important was that they were simply using a single family building site. And I think my understanding of affordable housing today is that it often needs to be a large project, and that it's not it doesn't change much if it's just housing 8 new people affordably. But what we saw in the 50s and 60s when these were built at a very large scale was that they were able to house many people affordably. As we said, I think in 10 years, LA's population grew by 1 million, and many of the newcomers lived in these buildings. So I think just like the shifting from building large projects or seeing affordable housing as something that must occupy a large project, and seeing it as something that can be done on a small scale many times.
Mm-hmm.
I also think like diversity and kind of types is very important. So, you know, we can't just be building 5 stories, and we can't just be building ADUs. There needs to be kind of like all kind of versions fulfilled, because people have different lifestyles, and you know, some live closer to work, some live far away from their work, and they're okay with that. And you know, there needs to be different housing typologies.
Is there any concerns that now these buildings are preserved, that they might actually lose the importance, or they become too popular, and suddenly you're destroying the actual quality of this this whole complex? That it's actually that you can do anything to the building, or you used to be able to do a lot of different things, but now it could actually be that it's doing more harm to the architecture than good by preserving it. That would be my worry. I really like your presentation, and also this kind of optimism and naivism which you see in the early drawings, and it's kind of strange that how it's also lost a bit when it's kind of get updated and preserved. So it's like it's difficult to keep this balance. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the dingbat has persevered because just the sheer numbers at the beginning, and as colorful as it is, I don't think it's kind of like self-aware. It just kind of is what it is, and people choose to preserve it because, you know, we as human beings, we just get nostalgic over things, you know. And I think, as has been pointed out in previous discussions by Masha, as the stock, you know, it begins to deplete, and as some owners and landowners and management companies choose to maybe demolish them unless they're preserved, there's going to be less and less of them. So that will kind of increase the demand. And once they're preserved, their value also goes up, and kind of interest and you know, care for them will also kind of increase. So I mean, I think that will also create invigorate like even more interest, and maybe the typology could be kind of updated for the current age, you know, and not necessarily mimic it, but to just kind of take like the qualities of density, the qualities of how the location, and things like that.
But I think, and we have to wrap up, but I think, I mean, there's a lot more to go into, and I think the question of preservation, because we can talk about the strategy of keep updating its image, and the idea of something that's preservable is something that's fixed. So it's flexible its adaptability to different situations through the last 50, 60 years is perhaps considered part of the dingbat. And so what is it going to become when it becomes a fixed image of, they want to preserve the idea of it and it's no longer contemporary. And it's always been a part of culture more than, I mean, as we say, Charlie, who lives in the house, doesn't actually know that he lives in that house. So that's not where the house lives. It lives in cult and lives in other forms of culture, which is also an interesting discussion. But that's not, I wanted to, I don't want to take any time actually from these really good questions. I just want to, maybe there's a last comment. I just want to congratulate you for your amazing work. I love the way that you take us through that. I love the flow moving between the images, how you right in the beginning situate us in LA and then take us through these 3 different ways of looking at the dingbat and then bring us to your own reintroduction of another digital image and new representation of the dingbat. I think it's really strong. So thanks for your great work. Is there any last comments? Would be great. Okay, but that's also that's good. Let's thanks so much. Let's actually just move on to the next one. I know it seems a bit rushed, but that's how it is. This is how it's going to be. So, but thank you so much, guys, for your great work. Marsha, do you have any last words though?
I've talked so much about it. I feel like I shouldn't. So, but great work, guys. It looks like, yeah, the narrative is amazing, and I liked how you introduce the styles of the artists that you've been describing. You introduce them into your work. Like the beginning of your video, I don't know whether it was intentional, but it seems like a Rainer Banham introduction, right? Like when you start talking about the, then when you start showing us the dingbat pictures right now in the city, you're using the same deadpan photography. So you're mixing the medium with the content in a very creative way, for lack of a better word. And I think there's just like a lot of layers that goes into your presentation and work, and I really appreciate it.
Interesting. Okay. Thanks. Good comment. And okay, great. Let's just move on. Let's see. Oops. Yeah. Yeah. So let's maybe that's to Hargeisa actually. Would be great. So I'm just going to share the screen again.
Hello everyone, my name is Abdulmajid Ahmed Abdi and my research partners are Hiba and Hamda. Our research took place in Hargeisa, Somaliland. So Somaliland is located in the Horn of Africa. It is bordered by Ethiopia and Djibouti. Somaliland gained independence from the recognized Somalia in 1991. The capital city of Somaliland is Hargeisa. Hargeisa has population of 1.2 million. Hargeisa has undergone massive construction boom for the last 2 decades in terms of building environment and construction, where we see single family houses being built massively right here. And throughout the city, we see billboards that display single family houses as the perfect housing typology. So what we're trying to understand is why single family houses is so popular, how single family houses came to be, what are other single family house typologies, how do they compare, and how do they compare? So the argument is that single family houses came from the huts and it morphed throughout time. And now we take a look at the nomadic hut.
We look at the plan of a Qasomali or a nomadic hut, which is the first housing typology that we're going to look at in our research. These nomadic huts were built in the past and continue to be built even today in both the countryside and in the city. In this plan, we see these sticks surrounding the property, creating a wall that provides a sense of privacy, enclosure, and ownership for the people. It also creates a courtyard, an outdoor space for the family that can be used for various different purposes or reasons. Inside the hut, we can see different huts in different scales. The main hut being the space where the family uses to sleep and rest. In this specific plan, this other hut is used as a kitchen. But also in other plans of Aqal Somalis, we can find other huts that can be used for different purposes. Outside the hut, we see another space, where animals are kept in the countryside. This space is important in a plan of Aqal Somali, as almost every family in the countryside owns a number of livestock. It also becomes important, so because of that, the presence of water and pasture in the area becomes important. So people move from one place to another looking for that. And they use lightweight materials to construct these huts that they can easily put up together and take apart whenever they're moving or whenever they need to. So alol, which is an indigenous tree, is used as the structure that's holding up the hut. And then it's covered with this beautiful fabric that's been weaved and made by the Somali women. Here we can see pictures of Somali women making and weaving these beautiful patterns. Here is a picture of an exterior of a hut. We also see here the inside or the interior of a hut. Now, in contrary, in the city, people live in huts only because, or mainly because of financial reasons. So not so much attention and detail is paid into the fabric or the material that they use to construct these their huts in the city. Instead, they use corrugated metal sheets and piece of old clothing, and they stitch them up together to cover or make their huts. Here we can see a house that's been made completely out of corrugated metal sheets, but it also still has sticks inside to hold up working as a structure. And then it's covered with these cloth that's been stitched up together. Because it's more fixed in the city and people don't need to move from one place to another, they can expand their plan and add more elements. As the specific hut that we visited, we can see that the family setting up a small shop at the corner of their house to they have like this ability to expand their plan and add more elements to it. Now, around the same time, another housing typology was developed. It first started to appear, which is the old single-family house. It first started to appear during the British colonial administration. So the British colonial administration built these houses, and it was mainly used by the people that worked for the colonial administration. The British also, around that time, introduced the use of new materials, such as the stone that's been used to construct these houses. Because despite being expensive, it also provided like insulation and durability that most of the houses that's been built back then still stand today. Later on, people used different materials to construct it, to construct these houses. Clay blocks were used when cement blocks weren't available, and then now when cement blocks are cheap and available, it's massively used in the construction industry. And then these old single-family houses bricks were used to construct them, and then stone is cladded on top of it, as we can see this picture, to kind of like still have that decorative exterior. In the plan of an old version of single-family house, we see again the courtyard, but now it's inside the house. We also see the kitchen moving along with the courtyard inside the house. In this space, the courtyard works as a ventilation system. It also creates a private, small space that can be gathered, which is enclosed from the public. These old versions of single-family house were mainly built downtown the city or the old Hargeisa. So when the city expanded and the population also grew, people started to move to the outskirts of Hargeisa. A new typology came about, which is the new version of the single-family house, such as this one shown in this picture. The context of the outskirts of Hargeisa provided new facilities for the single-family houses, which were such as the ones that we can see in this map. We can see sports fields and shopping malls, things like that are not mainly present in the downtown, are also accommodated into their context. We can see the plan here, the newer version of the single-family house. Interestingly, we see the courtyard is being moved out of the house, and now we have these perimeter walls surrounding this space. And then we have this courtyard. And then also the kitchen moves outside the house into the courtyard. Now, through this journey of these 4 housing typologies, we notice a couple of things or elements that are present in the nomadic huts that has also been transferred throughout these 4 housing typologies. So first being in a hut, we see these beautiful fabric material used for the exterior to make it more decorative. Somehow, we also see the perimeter wall of a newer version of single-family house, also cladded with this beautiful patterns of stone, to also keep that decorative or appearance of the exterior. We also notice how the courtyard and the kitchen working together, moving outside and inside the house, in the huts and also in the single-family house. Also notice the kitchen being moved outside into the courtyard in the newer version of the single-family house, same as the huts in the Aqal Somali. Interestingly, throughout Hargeisa, we also find these hero in front of the single-family houses, same as the ones that we find in Aqal Somali where animals are kept. So now, on a final note, we say the newer version of single-family house that had been built massively for the last couple of decades has emerged from elements that are present in the Aqal Somali, and also has transferred through these 4 housing typologies, combined with a Western ideology of single-family house.
Making these chunks is to draw out near perspective of familiar building types for wide public. These spaces bring out the feeling of home in the single-family house because it's where families meet the most. Hospitality is very crucial in Somali culture, that it has become obligatory among the people. We often see these spaces in Somali households that are very formal and a lot of attention is paid to. to make it presentable for guests and events. If we go back to the nomadic huts, you will see that even back then, it was obligatory to have such a space. We have the big tree as a presentable space for people or events. Even during the process of making the photogrammetry, my mom was there telling me to organize the space so it looks very neat and presentable for the people that see in the photogrammetry. Even with no physical guests, the elements of Somali hospitality is still there.
Okay. Hey, hi Rashid. Good you could join us.
I'm really sorry I'm joining you late. I mean, I apologize to everyone.
That's okay. I'm sure you're busy in the office.
I missed. I mean, it's really fascinating. You know, this kind of history. It's a shame. I'm really sorry I missed it. It seems.
Yeah,
really,
but you know you didn't, because I was and I didn't realize, but I'm so happy that you actually joined us right at the beginning of the presentation. So I think you started like a half minute in, and so it's really great timing, and it's fantastic to have you here to give perspectives, and also to Ahmed, who's in the hiding right now. But good to have you here too, Ahmed. Ahmed has been working with the students on the research, giving them access to buildings, as well as helping them with construction details and so on. But anyway, so Rashid, what I was saying, so Rashid is a director at the About State University School of Architecture. But what I was Rashid been saying to everyone is the format is so that we only have about 15 minutes maximum each for each project. So I'm just going to open the floor up and get the conversation going. Yeah.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. It's nice to see these different typologies and how they are evolving over time, and you can kind of trace fragments from early on being passed in new generations. It's also strange in a way to see a 17th century French castle inside a home being reproduced as an interior. So there's a lot of strange cultural interactions kind of appearing in a project like this. I was thinking, do you think that there's room for new, completely different typologies which are not mimicking Western single family housing, or not being directly a translation from the original nomadic hut, but something which is a more contemporary, perhaps a more resource friendly typology in an area like this? How do you see the prospect for that? I mean, I know that we have to build houses for 1 billion people or something in Africa for the next in the next 30 years. So there's really a need for kind of a reinvention of new typologies in Africa. How do you see this?
Hello, my name is Hiba, and if we could say in the future there will be new different typologies or new different houses that's going to be built in this country, I believe it wouldn't like make more difference, because like for like in our houses, what's mainly important is the Somali culture being in there. Like we moved from this nomadic hut to the single family house, which is single family house is a bit like Western, but still it has Somali culture in it. So it has like Somali culture hospitality in there. And if it's there, then I don't think nobody will mind.
Hibo, I just want to kind of follow up on that. I mean, obviously, I'm a practitioner, so there's a constant kind of a conversation about typology and what types of houses that the clients want. And often there's a discussion always about the economy of building and how much it's going to cost me. Today, I was having a conversation with someone that wants a house, but then when they put the numbers together, the cost of the plot of land and the cost of building one of these villas, not necessarily, I mean, quite elaborate villa in a way, and some of the images you see obviously relate to that. It's kind of, you know, incredibly expensive. And they said that, well, you know, for the cost of that land and the amount of money that I'm building with, I might as well, I don't know, buy a 2-bedroom house in Manchester or outskirts of London, and I will make better sort of income. So I'm curious. People are beginning to have that kind of a conversation. How relevant are these large villas that are sitting on large space, that are expensive, that are on the outskirts of town, that are in suburbia with little kind of an infrastructure? So there is that kind of a conversation that's kind of going on now. But I'm just quite curious to our cohorts. Obviously, they made a lot of observations about the kind of environment and the specific and the distinctive social and cultural practices that take place in these kind of villas. But would they want to live in these types of houses in the future? Or do they see something different? Obviously, they are a different generation. And in this country, everyone aspires to have their own home. And everyone historically has always had, maybe they might, you know, they always had their own plot of land. So I just want to kind of throw a question. Do you see yourself living in a different type of typology to these modern kind of villas that most people aspire to live in, and that are kind of, you know, quite prominent in Hargeisa? Maybe Hibo, maybe you can respond to that. I mean, what kind of a, you know, these, I mean, what kind of a house would you like to live in, having made all these observations and research about what's going on in Hargeisa?
Like I said before, and actually that actually leads to the question that Jakob asked. It's mainly actually about if the Somali culture is still there. Like if we go back to the nomadic house and single family house, there are those spaces that you see them still there from the hut to the single family house, and they didn't change. So this actually means that people are like still attached to this idea because it's purely Somali culture, and Somali hospitality defines what Somali is. Like if we go to the chunks, we chose this space, which is the living room plus the dining room, and that kind of space is like very organized, very presentable than the other home. Like if we see the whole house, that place is like way different. And the reason is because you want, like, when someone comes to your house as a guest or you have an event there, this is the space that you will take them to, not anywhere else. The reason is because this place is very presentable, and we're in our culture, when someone comes in our house, we like to sit them somewhere that is very, very beautiful and very presentable. And as in about the question that you asked is also the privacy. If we go back to the privacy, is the courtyard keep moving from inside to outside is because people have, like in our culture, we have this idea of like privacy has to be there. We want to have somewhere that is like our own, and nobody stranger can come in unless they are asking us our permission, whatever that is. So those things, if they are there, I don't mind staying.
I'm just going to very quickly just follow up a little bit. We have people that are coming to us in offices, and they want to, you know, build sort of commercial buildings, high rise, and I make observations of the types of high rises that are coming up, mostly kind of retail, commercial offices, and retail spaces that are beyond ground floor are always dead. You know, nobody's going up there. People are not, it's ingrained within the culture, this idea of going upstairs on the first or second or third floor to shop. Somehow I'm really intrigued. They're not doing that. So I just wonder, just following up a little bit, whether, you know, maybe obviously for cost reasons, but also about the social, spatial kind of practices, whether inhabitants in urban areas in Hargeisa and beyond are maybe prepared to live in apartments at all. I just wonder whether that conversation during the research of this project has been, you know, on the table at all.
Yeah, but I think well, I should let actually the cluster. I can say that they haven't really been looking at that, but just to shift the conversation around a little bit and get the last comments in. I'm just going to throw a few things up there. First of all, I think you guys are doing amazing work. I love the way that you talk of it as a journey, that you actually sort of take us into that, into this space and actually allow us to sort of hold our hand a little bit and introduce the different forms of housing and really carefully show how materials from different typologies are shifted from one situation to the next. And I think it's as a first step at trying to understand what the single family house means, because this is, and also perhaps to the opening question by Jakob is, and perhaps the very first comment, Jakob, where you talk about the layering of things, because this is really a layered object. And so for us to seriously talk about single family houses go far beyond discussions of just organization or program. And it's understanding of, and as you presented, this of course also influence of Western ideals. And so what to replace it. And that becomes really a discussion about images also. And so I think that I thought it was interesting juxtaposition between the journey that you guys took us on, and we understood it immediately. And then also how, and this is perhaps due to the collaboration we're doing here, that we somehow have to understand it through 4 plan drawings. And that's of course an extreme abstraction of space that we think we can draw conclusions from. And so we're really talking about perhaps a different advertisement campaign for architecture in Somaliland than the billboards or the plan drawings, but a third place that we don't know what is yet. And I think the way that you're taking us through these different moments and showing us how it's much more about the materials, much about the history, it's much about, but also many other things. I thought that was beautifully done. So I just want to congratulate you for that work. Yeah. And of course open up for last comments, but really great. Marcia, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, I have a shared, well, thank you guys. This was amazing. Like I haven't seen your presentation in a while, and there's been so much progress in the last weeks. But I have a shared comment for both groups about the relationship to the building site and the parcel, because we could see like understand that connection between the home and the organizational unit of the land use in the city, I think is absolutely fascinating. Because if you look at the Dingbat, right, like it maximizes the parcel potential, right? Like it uses everything it could in order to have as many people housed as possible and cars, right? And then when you were presenting and you showed how the hut had transformed into an orthogonal grid and orthogonal courtyard, you can start seeing how not only it changed its form because it's a sedentary lifestyle, right, where you have to store things and you have to like build permanently, but then also it starts adapting to a very globalized way of organizing land, right, and organizing real estate in the cities. And I think that's like a very interesting transition that you showed. And I'm just fascinated by that as well, like the relationship of form, of building form to land use, and vice versa is, I think, a fascinating thread that goes through your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the limits of representation, which Emil, you've pointed to. I was really interested in the moment describing the nomadic huts and trying to represent and plan the use of the tree or the kind of bushes that surrounded the hedo, if I remember the term correctly, and the kind of incapacity to properly capture or represent those natural elements. And I'm thinking about that in relation to ornamentation specifically. So then when we go to the kind of contemporary example of the living room space, ornamentation and kind of abstracted natural forms become internalized into that living room space. And interestingly, those kind of natural elements or represented natural elements are similarly resistant to representation and plan. And I think that what was interesting was that in the chunk drawing, we were suddenly able to see that represented quite effectively. And so I'd wonder in future iterations or future development of the project, how this question of nature and its representation might be further pursued, and maybe it's exactly not in plan where that pursuit might happen. I don't know, something that I was really interested in seeing in your presentation.
It's a good point. Thanks, Gary. Any last comments? Natalia, are you're good? Okay. So fantastic though. I'm excited for you guys. So now it's in southern Bavaria, where I'm at the moment. It's 7:01, which means it is 1 minute past 8 in Hargeisa and 1 minute past 9 and 10 in the morning in LA. And that means that we should get to the last project and wrap things up. So with that, we're gonna move on to Copenhagen and talk about Tingbjerg, this garden apartment complex. So I'm gonna share my screen.
Tingbjerg is a garden apartment complex and a district in the greater Copenhagen area, built during the modernist period. In recent years, it has received significant attention due to its current placement on the ghetto list, as well as its redevelopment. Tingbjerg and the image of the district can be understood without looking into how the district is represented. That includes representations of its history, its social aspects, and its media coverage, etc. This catalog presents different representation forms centering around our research of Tingbjerg, as well as our main idea and narrative of how occupation within the district changes the images, the representations, and our perception of Tingbjerg, which all result in today's ghetto discourse, as well as the redevelopment of the district. Our catalog focuses on the representations of Tingbjerg in the past, in the present, and in the future, and how these are all interlinked with one another. More specifically, we look into how some particular architectural and urban elements appear to be ideals throughout these periods. The catalog is color coordinated, so the yellow, green, and blue spots align with past, present, and future representations of the district.
So let's start with what Tingbjerg is today, where most of the residents would answer that it's actually a nice green place to live with a community life where people know each other and where it's okay to go out shopping in your sweatpants, as one of our interviews stated. Outsiders' perception of both the place and its residents is often heavily influenced by negative media coverage, which is embedded in and stems from a broader national discourse about a seemingly failed integration of mainly Muslim people into Danish society. One key aspect that is almost impossible to avoid in today's representation of Tingbjerg is thus the labeling of it as a so-called ghetto under the Danish ghetto law. While the so-called ghetto as a category was introduced to the political agenda in 2010 with the introduction of the ghetto list, the discourses around it already date back to the 1990s. Although there are in total 5 different criteria for the designation of an area as a so-called ghetto, the most important one, as it is the only criteria that has to be fulfilled, is the share of migrants and the descendants of non-Western background to exceed 50%, which is the case in Tingbjerg. However, other than dominant discourses might suggest, this share of 73% in 2020 does not actually represent a deliberate decision of migrant families to cluster in Tingbjerg, but can also be traced back to the allocation of public housing by local decision makers. It were thus different dynamics and decisions of the past that influence today's representation of Tingbjerg and undermine the ideal of it as a so-called district with a diverse population where as far as possible all the different social strata of the city are represented, to quote Sten Aller Rasmussen, the architect and urban planner of Tingbjerg. His ideals for the good life essentially influence floor plans, distribution of different flat types, orientation of building blocks and streets, as well as the design of the outdoor spaces in Tingbjerg, which are condensed in the master plan for the area.
It was in 1958 when Stina Eller Rasmussen got the order to create a master plan for a suburban living area outside of Copenhagen and to realize his image of the best possible life for residents of all age. A bit of to the context, and the birth rates in the post-war area, so 1958, were booming, and the population in the Copenhagen core area became more and more dense, which led the government to form the idea to bring people out there and improve the living conditions for everyone. Creating Tingbjerg was just part of a bigger plan, the Five-Finger Plan. The Five-Finger Plan is a strategical plan for the East Denmark, where 5 metro lines are provided, starting from the Copenhagen center and going to 5 directions, which looks like 5 fingers. And along these 5 metro lines, it was planned to form housing projects. And in between the fingers, there's like space left for green areas called the green wedges, to build a balance between the living areas and the natural parts. And this balance was also one of the main topics for Stina Rasmussen when he designed the social housing project Tingbjerg. In comparison to urban areas, the housing project is very low dense by using only approximately 28% of the surface, and create garden and park spaces on the rest. And that should bring the habitants of all ages together, and were thus central to the image community life in Tingbjerg. Tingbjerg's main housing stock was developed in 2 major stages, from 1955 to 1958 and from 1964 to 1972, and with several additions ongoing until today. And the current redevelopment of Tingbjerg thus actively works with this narrative of Tingbjerg as always been under development, to pose this as a red thread and kind of justification for current changes to the built and social environment. As the new district was to blend into the green surroundings, the big majority of the buildings are 3-story high apartment blocks, and then there are several exceptions, like a 13-story tall high-rise at the main street, which is also to cover the local heating plan, and then several different typologies that can be found in Tingbjerg. Here is the aerial shot of Tingbjerg. And there are different typologies because Rasmussen wanted to build the place with the concept of a city within a city. So through including public institutions like a school, a medical house, a church, and furthermore shops and restaurants, Rasmussen hoped to include the benefits of the life in an urban area and to contribute to the best possible living. And the appearance of Tingbjerg as a spatial unit from the 1950s is outstanding and thus today perceived to be a conservation value, mainly due to the use of iconic yellow brick on the facades and white shutters and the characteristic roof shapes. As these recurring themes in the whole development, Tingbjerg today appears as a spatial unit in itself and is clearly demarcated from the surrounding areas. And this almost standardized appearance from the outside is also taken up in the floor plans. So these standardizations convey a normative deception of family constellations and everyday routines within the Danish welfare society.
It were thus the ideals of family and community life in a green surrounding close to the city that informed and influenced the development of Tingbjerg in the first place. And it had also these very same ideals that are now taken up in the context of its redevelopment. So in marketing the new housing units, the private developer makes clear references to these ideals of the past by stating, and I quote, "We have gotten a Tingbia that is version 2.0, and where the glorious values that were there at the beginning have been retained." However, as several interviews stated, Tingbia nowadays actually already is characterized by its green surroundings and small-scale architecture, which mainly caters families. One of our interviewees said in this context that for the new branding of Tingbia, it is actually not so much about creating a new image through adding anything, but instead through showing how and what Tingbia actually is. Tingbia's redevelopment is thus more of a political decision to impose the seemingly predominant ideal of social mix to the area than to actually change any conditions for the better for the current residents. It is hence the ghetto discourse that in this case influences changes in the built environment, and through this also changes in the social composition of the area. So by introducing an additional 1,000 private housing units to the area, about 3,300 more residents are expected to move in, and this share of social housing is to drop from the current 96% to 35% by 2030. So with the introduction of private housing to the area, one interviewee suggests that the whole redevelopment is aiming at attracting, and I quote, "richer, more employed, whiter residents to move in." To cater then this target group, Rasmussen's ideas of family life in a green area close to the city are kind of translated, as one of our interviewees stated, to modern needs, with a reduction of the total amount of free green spaces between the buildings and a downscaling of the remaining open areas. So the existing characteristics of Tingbia are thus taken up and adapted to expected current needs. So within the corresponding renderings, the new building typologies as well as some of the outer spaces are depicted, pointing to how the new and the old building structure are supposed to kind of merge and interact with each other. A recurring theme within these is also the imposed social mix, so that these renderings visually communicate the envisioned ideals of the private developers for the future of Tingbia. However, the whole redevelopment is met by a lot of critique and resistance, formulated both by current residents as well as people working in the area. One point of critique as formulated by people working in the area is the short time frame of development, which would not provide for a sustainable urban redevelopment and the necessary participation of the current residents. To quote, "So it kind of forces through a redevelopment in a very short time span, where you need to focus a lot on attracting investors from the outside. And also, of course, the investors need to focus on attracting high-income resident groups. And that kind of forces the whole redevelopment in ways that make it difficult to engage the residents that are already living there." By the residents, a lot of resistance is formulated in regard to the building activities in the short and middle term, and the reduction of green common spaces in the long term. As the private housing units are to be added through densification of the common spaces in between the buildings, the common green spaces as places of exchange will be reduced, which then again will also influence the social dynamics within the neighborhood. Besides these changes in the built environment, current residents are very well aware of the changing social composition of the area as well, and they fear a social division between the current residents and the new residents, with the latter being the A-team and prioritized by local decision makers. A source of resistance is thus also how the redevelopment in Tingbia is communicated, mainly to the inside, with residents not really feeling well informed or at all included in the decision-making process, and even lacking basic information on the actual developments happening basically right in their backyards. This lack of communication, missing information, and inclusion in the process then also contributes to the fear of residents being evicted in the long term, although currently the social housing stock is not planned to be reduced. However, so while on the one hand the residents are now formulating their claims, real estate websites are already selling the new owner-occupied flats, which are supposed to be finalized by 2030. And it is not only the ownership form or facade that is going to be different to Tingbia's social housing stock, but also how people are imagined to occupy their own four walls. So we actually wanted to understand now how people nowadays occupy these spaces that were in the 1950s envisioned by Rasmussen to provide for the so-called good life. So in order to find out on that, we knocked on people's door and asked for a glimpse inside their flats and thus also inside their lives.
So our goal by knocking on different apartments and like getting inside into an apartment was to capture the different moments of privacy and public, and yeah, and just the moments of living. So we decided on taking 8 images that represent different moments in the apartment of living. And the technique that we use is called photogrammetry. And it works like that you just take hundreds of photos and then put them in the computer, and the computer calculates a 3D model out of it. And through this calculation process, the pictures are represented more fractal and fragmented and imperfect, which leads to a loss of detail and focus on the objects. That makes them more important. And yeah, the loss of the details is occurring through light sources like this, which irritates the model, or movement, or just a lack of photos. For this look into the life of a resident of Tingberg, and added another layer to the recitation of Tingberg, and hereby also states the end of our presentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. And right off, I have to remember to say that this has been a collaboration between, as I said, introduction, between 2 different branches of Copenhagen University, so 4 cities, visual culture, as well as students from the Royal Danish Academy. So yeah, so we just have 3 students present, but obviously there are more that can also, and of course, encourage you to also join the conversation. But thank you so much. Fantastic. I'm just going to open the floor right up. I'm sure there are, I'm sure there will be comments and questions. So please go ahead. And also I can see, did we lose Natalia? Is that right? Or am I missing a window? Yeah, but I did see her clap though. Her very first, her very last act on our little room was to congratulate you guys. So, but but yeah, I invite, the floor is open.
Can I ask a question? Thank you for a very nice presentation. Of course, it's a place close to our heart here in Copenhagen. It's an iconic place, and also today, of course, a very controversial one with all these changes. What do you think the role of the architect is in these drawings? Surely they used these drawings, kind of these renderings of very joyful, playful children in the gardens, and you see the last images you showed from the interiors of these flats. How is architecture used politically in a project like this?
Because this is extra interesting, right? Because we have actually a composition of non-architects. Okay. So you must have an idea of what it is architects do or don't do.
Yeah, I was not sure. So I'm not an architect, so I was not sure whether I should answer this question.
That's even better then. Yeah.
So as we were looking at this, these different representations, it was actually quite interesting because on the one hand, we have the insider's view of Tingbjerg, which is very much depicted in positive ways. And then we have the normal, kind of in quotation marks, normal representation of Tingbjerg from the outside as a place that is not so much liked by policymakers as well. And then the architects, basically, they more relate to the narrative of the inside. So they depict the area as something very positive, and they try to communicate a picture of how they imagine life to be. But at the same time, they make use of these narratives of Tingbjerg not living up to the ideals yet. So actually there's, in one way, still this mismatch of insiders and architects' perspective. And on the other side, they are very close. So this was actually a really interesting dynamic for us to observe them also.
Fantastic.
Yeah. We also felt like there was probably it goes back to what Rasmussen initially sketched out and imagined social life to be, but also the current representation maybe does not include the social mix aspect of it. It still doesn't address that. Like, we don't see people of different backgrounds coming together in the representation. So maybe that is.
Or they do in a very predefined way, I think. Maybe that's kind of what's bothering me a bit, that it seems like it's already laid out the way people are supposed to play out the social life in between these buildings.
It's actually crediting, well, it's I don't know if it's discrediting the role of architecture or letting it off the hook too easily by not claiming what it actually does, because it is conveying a particular singular understanding of what Tingbjerg must become, and that's of course a really old, a really very important question in architecture. And Tingbjerg, it just gets amplified. It's on steroids in that place.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps even more cynically, it's to suggest that the architect is complicit, has always been complicit in these processes of privatization, neoliberalization of kind of public good, namely housing.
Mm-hmm.
I think this question is really interesting, though, of representation, particularly with regard to its political valences in this specific context. I'd be interested to think the possibility of perhaps your chunk drawing, or I don't know exactly what you're calling it, to begin to incorporate in a projective way these housing proposals, these redevelopment proposals, and to see what through this kind of close analysis, what this interface might begin to look like. I don't know if that's quite technically possible given photogrammetry, but I'd be interested to kind of think through that interface, which is to say that I think in your instance, we have a kind of contemporary pressure being placed on this instance in a very different way to the other cases that we've looked to this morning, in my case this morning.
Did you guys see the plans for the new developments, the unit plans? Are they available, or can we see only the drawings? I'm just really curious whether the housing units themselves are still catered to a very nuclear standard family, right? That the old developments were composed of, whether that has changed or not, or whether there is more variety in them.
So specifically for the units that are going to be added through densification, it's mainly family housing, whereas there are some elements at the western part of the development where they will also build youth and elderly housing. So there is going to be a social mix in this sense. However, it's not going to be within the same building typology. So they are still kind of separate within the area.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Kritsi, Lefke, while we are talking, maybe you can just share the board and just browse around while we talk as a kind of nice background. I think that would be good. So yeah, I'm just going to throw another comment in, and maybe it's building to the previous point and also to what Gary was getting at. Something that really got me was, first of all, I thought, Lefke, when you sort of, it's almost humoristic, the dialogue between, also the confrontation between the interviews and then the representation forms. I think that was beautifully done. It was almost, I would say, humoristic. And then there's this moment where suddenly we're looking into this that could be out of any magazine, on a shelf of any bookstore, gas station, or your parents' coffee table, and then these renderings of like the perfect life, and then you move from those images, and then suddenly, and then we go into the chunks, and then Tim says something that really gets me. I'm like, that's it, right? Tim, you suddenly say like that it's because you're explaining photogrammetry, and you say it irritates the model. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. Like, I don't even quite know what it means, but I just know that it's about irritating the model, because there's something, and this is perhaps Jacob's point, that this perfection of imagery is perhaps very counterproductive. So I really love what we're seeing. Like these visualizations here are beautiful. So I want to congratulate you on that work as well.
If I might, that I think they're not only. I think they're actually very dangerous. These are very perfect images that makes projects look like something out of Jehovah's Witnesses of Jehovah brochure, or something with happy people playing, in green fields, and it has nothing to do with what most people live, and it's deceptive, and it's dangerous, and sometimes you think that it would be much better if you would go back to representations. Like you would do them 50 years ago, where they were far more abstract. There's something really seductive about this kind of images that kind of takes away the discussion from the content of the architecture, or what we're doing in an area like this. So I think they're not neutral at all. They're really they're powerful tools. And it's at the same time, I was also thinking that this is interesting that we have these three different projects. So you have LA from '59 and all the dingbat houses, which was one way of expanding the city very rapidly. This was Tingbjerg was the Copenhagen way of expanding, and then we saw from Somaliland also another typology of expanding. So you have these big movements in urban life, and you also see both in LA and here in Copenhagen how it's actually also creating a lot of problems when it's not done the right way. Or maybe it's inborn that you have to redefine it every 50 years or something. But certainly things has to be worked over once in a while to still be alive. That was a long one. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one, and it's almost it could almost work as a concluding mark, unless someone is like sitting on the edge of the chair to say something. Okay, so I think that was a fantastic finish, and thank you, Jakob, for drawing a bit of perspective to the other to the sort of relation between the different clusters. And what I'm really happy about is because we set out this experiment not exactly knowing where it would go, and I think now in the very end of it, we're seeing not only a dialogue across the sort of issues that you've been addressing, but also in the way that you graphically have represented your material and the way you presented it. I think it's a very interesting dialogue, and it's actually worked. I must say it worked really, really well. So as a kind of concluding mark from my point of view, I want to thank all of you for the amazing work you've done and your openness towards this project, and really putting a lot of effort into it. And yeah, that would be my remark. But I leave the floor open for a few more.
Yeah, I also just want to continue on that note exactly. I think, as we talked about, Frederick, is something that happens that is really interesting when you put together people from many different cultures, is that you have to go through these sort of like explanatory steps where things can get banal in a way that also allows us to interact in a different way, which is super productive. I think in this case, I'm really happy to see all the amazing works that you guys have done, and it's been a pleasure to follow it. So yeah, just congratulations, everyone.
Okay. That I'm gonna sign off, but I was just say we will communicate on Discord and have like a follow-up session very briefly, sort of evaluation and all that. So we won't do that now. I want to thank our critics that found time today in the various different ends of the day. Thank you, Jakob, for making it this time. I'm really happy that you could make it work, and that's amazing. All the way to LA, Gary, amazing, and it's great to see you again. And we're gonna follow up, I think, with more conversation around this. I hope would be amazing. And yeah, Christopher, thanks for being part of this project the whole way. Christian, thanks. I know you're sketching your notebook. Christian is going to make a composition around this project and through a graphic novel. So he's probably drawing at the moment. Thank you, Christian, for being part of it. And Rashid Ali, I'm so happy that you could find time. I know you have a busy schedule in Hargeisa with all your projects, but it's great to have you here. And I guess you can be proud of your students' work. And Masha, always great thank you for your support for being part of this project the whole way and helping to initiate it. So thank you so much. And also for your many very valuable comments throughout the time here. Ahmed, that we can't see, but Ahmed, if you're there, I just want to thank you for your support of this project and helping out in Somaliland. That's been really, really helpful. So thank you for that. Then to all the student researchers, it's been a pleasure, and we'll see each other again on Zoom very soon. I will send something out on the Discord. That would be that. I think that's it. There you go, Ahmed. Good to see you. That would be my final words. Should we call it a day, a morning, an evening?
Thank you very much, Emil. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.